Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be dissecting one of my biggest bugbears that I see a lot in bookish spaces, and that is the comment that gets left on videos about reading diversity that there just aren't any good sapphic books. Because you're just wrong. And to prove it, today I'm going to talk you through some of my favourite sapphic books divided by genres. You can see the list of genres that I'm going to cover in this video here, so no matter what you're into, I've got a rec for you. Needless to say, there are some genres that I read more than others, and there are going to be plenty of subgenres that I haven't been able to touch on this video. So if you're looking for a specific rec of a specific genre, leave it in the comments and I can try and give you one. And of course, if you think I've missed a book off this list, please leave it in the comments below so that people can find more sapphic recs. I'm going to start with sapphic fantasy because fantasy is my most read genre ever, and sapphic fantasy will always hold a special place in my heart, and it feels wrong to talk about sapphic fantasy without mentioning The Prior of the Orange Tree. I think for most people this is going to be what comes to mind when you think sapphic fantasy, and for good reason. The Prior of the Orange Tree is a high fantasy book of epic scale which is set in a divided world as they have to come together to face the threat of an ancient enemy awakening, the Nameless One. It's one of those books which is really hard to explain what it's about without giving anything away, but basically it's got everything you could ever want in a fantasy book: dragons, forbidden magic, the most epic world building ever, incredible characters, and a sapphic romance. But if you've already read The Prior of the Orange Tree or are understandably a little bit intimidated by the sheer size of this book, then here are some other recs which I think anyone who likes The Prior of the Orange Tree will love. The Jasmine Throne is an Indian-inspired high fantasy which follows a captive princess and her maidservant who possesses forbidden magic as they essentially aim to overthrow the Empire. I think all I really need to say about this book is that it has morally grey lesbians with swords, and that's basically the whole book. And if that hasn't convinced you, then I don't know what else I can say. But no, again, this book has so much intricate world building with really interesting discussions of politics and culture and empire, and so much sapphic yearning. The magic system in this is also really interesting, and this is actually the first book in a trilogy, and the final book comes out later this year, so it's the perfect time to pick it up. Another book with quite a similar vibe to The Jasmine Throne is The Final Strife. This is an African-inspired high fantasy book, which again follows our three main characters as they attempt to rebel against the Empire. In The Final Strife, the Empire is divided based on the colour of people's blood, and this directly leads to really interesting world building and a really interesting magic system, which I really loved. And it also has a lot of my favourite tropes in it, including sapphic enemies to lovers, but it also has at its centre a chosen one who misses her calling. And I just think that's such an interesting plot device, and I really liked all of our POV characters. And again, that one is the first book in a trilogy, with the final book coming out later this year. And now my last sapphic fantasy rec for this video, for something a little bit different, is A Dark and Drowning Tide. This is actually an ARC copy. It doesn't come out until September, I believe, but add it to your TBRs because trust me, this book is amazing. A Dark and Drowning Tide follows our main character Lorelei, who is a folklorist who finds herself on an expedition from the king to try and find a spring with huge magical power. Also, I'm so sorry for any weird background noise. My cat is on my bed and he is snoring so incredibly loudly. But anyway, back to A Dark and Drowning Tide. I really loved this book, and if you like dark academia, you definitely will as well, because it's definitely got dark academia elements and vibes to it, and our main relationship is a sapphic academic rivals to lovers romance. There's also a murder mystery which plays a big part of this plot, which I really enjoyed, and overall I just really liked the fantasy elements and the whole vibes of this book. Now, moving on to sci-fi, my main recommendation for this genre is actually my favourite book series ever, my favourite books in the whole world, and that is, of course, the Locked Tomb series. If you've seen anyone talking about these books online, you've probably heard them described as lesbian necromancers in space, which is a very apt description, but there is also so much more to this series than that. The world building is again on an epic scale and just so intricate, with a lot of focus on themes of imperialism and religious trauma. I genuinely think these books have some of the best use of narration ever. All of the POV characters are such unreliable narrators, but in a really clever way, and perspective is played with so often. The entire second book is written in second person perspective, and it just works so well. It's so clever, and I could ramble about these books forever. There are so many characters, but you become attached to every single one of them, even the ones that you don't think you're gonna like, and you remember them all so clearly and so vividly. And there is so much sapphicness, so much gender funkiness. It's so good. Also, if you're a fan of like the whole cannibalism as a metaphor for love type vibe, you're really gonna love these books. I love these books. I feel like it does need to be mentioned that these books are confusing and you will be left in the dark for a lot of them and you'll feel like nothing's making sense, but please trust me and please stick with it. Everything will become clear in the end and the payoff is so worth it. And now for another equally confusing sapphic sci-fi wreck. It is, of course, This Is How You Lose the Time War. You've probably heard of this book by now due to that viral tweet, which got everyone talking about this book a couple of months ago, but for good reason. This book follows Red and Blue, who are on opposite sides of a war through time and space, and a lot of it is told through the letters that they leave to each other scattered throughout the timeline. This is once again sapphic enemies to lovers, and once again it is so confusing and you'll feel like you don't know what's going on for most of the book, but just stay for the vibes are so worth it, and I do think it all came together in the end, and the writing in this is so beautiful. It's also really short, so definitely recommend this one. The next genre on my list is romance, but I am really not a big romance reader. There are so many sapphic romance books on my TBR, but I just haven't got to any of them, so please do leave any romance recs in the comments, both for me and for anyone else watching this video. But my one sapphic romance rec is If You Still Recognise Me. If You Still Recognise Me is a YA coming-of-age romance which follows Elsie, who has a crush on her internet best friend Ada, and she's just made up her mind to tell Ada how she feels when suddenly her old best friend Joan reappears in her life. This book is fundamentally a sapphic romance, but it also has so much more wider queer rep, and I just love how much it explores queer identity as a whole and how well it interweaves these discussions with discussions of culture and identity. There is so much of a focus on family and friendship and found family, and I also really love the elements of fandom as Elsie and Ada have connected through a internet fandom, and I just think it's the perfect YA book. If you're a fan of Heartstopper, you will absolutely love this, and I will never shut up about it because I think it deserves so much more hype than it gets. Moving on to our next genre, my favourite sapphic contemporary fiction books are, without a doubt, Emily Austen's books, Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead and Interesting Facts About Space. Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead follows Gilda, a mentally ill atheist lesbian who is both obsessed with and terrified about the thought of death, who accidentally ends up working in a Catholic church after following an ad for therapy, whilst Interesting Facts About Space follows Enid, who is a lesbian who is obsessed with space and true crime and has a phobia of bold men and increasingly becomes convinced that someone is following her. Both of these books essentially feel like character studies, which works so well because Emily Austen's characters speak to me in a way that no other characters ever have. They feel so real and so relatable and so flawed, and they're just so interesting that it just keeps you so hooked throughout the entire book. I also really love Emily Austen's writing style and the way these books are so morbidly funny and like humorous, but also so sad, but so hopeful and so charming. I love these books so much, and I think Emily Austen deserves so much more hype as an author. She has another book coming out early next year, and I am so excited. This next book is kind of contemporary fiction. I'd describe it more as speculative fiction, but I wasn't really sure what section to put it in, so I'm just going to talk about it here, and that is Private Rights by Julia Armfield. This is set in a possible future where the Earth is slowly drowning due to climate change and follows three sisters who were estranged that have been brought back together in the wake of their father's death. We follow them as they explore the somewhat sinister goings-ons that seem to be surrounding their mother's death, and as they navigate their relationships with each other in this weird new world. All of the sisters are sapphic. I believe they're all lesbians, but I can't fully remember, so they're definitely all sapphic, and I really enjoy how that's incorporated into the story, and I am just such a huge fan of Julia Armfield's writing. Her writing style is so almost poetic and lyrical and so beautiful and yet so readable, and the atmosphere in this book is unlike anything else. It is so vividly atmospheric and it really feels like you're just being transported into this world when you read it. I absolutely fell in love with it and I cannot recommend it enough. Closely related, moving on to my next genre, which is horror, my recommendation for sapphic horror is Our Wives Under the Sea, again by Julia Armfield. I'm not really a fan of gory horror, so this is very much a psychological horror rec, although there are definitely elements of body horror in this if that's what you're going for. This book follows Miri after her wife Leah returns from a deep sea mission, but she returns changed, something's going on there, and it quickly becomes clear that the Leah who has returned is not the same Leah who left. This book is kind of told in two halves, one being Miri and Leah following the expedition, and one told through memories, Miri and Leah before the expedition. This book is such a beautiful blend of a love story and a horror story. It is so creepy and so dark, but also so heart-wrenchingly sad. It really, really grips you, and it's so beautifully written that you feel like you're there in Miri's situation, and it really got to me when I first read it, but I absolutely fell in love with it. Again, Julia Armfield's writing is just absolutely stunning, and this is one of those books which I think really, really sticks with you for a long time after you read it. Another sapphic paranormal horror with elements of body horror, you can really tell what type of horror I gravitate to, is The Invocations, and again, I absolutely loved this book. This follows 3 young women as they team up to take down a supernatural killer who is only targeting women. And the reason why he is only targeting women is in this world, only women can use magic. This book is a YA horror book, and it honestly kind of ticks all of the boxes for me, with a sapphic romance, dark academia vibes, witchy vibes, a bit of necromancy, a bit of body horror, and some really, really captivating characters. I really enjoyed getting to know our 3 main characters and reading about the development in them and in their relationship, and overall I just had a really great time reading this one. The Invocations also kind of functions as a double rec because it fits into horror definitely, but it also fits into my next genre, which is thriller/mystery, so definitely take it as a recommendation if you're interested in that. But my other mystery recommendation is Where Sleeping Girls Lie. Where Sleeping Girls Lie is a dark academia murder mystery set in a boarding school with a sapphic romance at its heart, and it is as good as that sounds. I absolutely fell in love with this book when I read it a couple of months ago, and I definitely think it's going to be one of my top books of the year. It is quite a long book, so I wouldn't describe it as like a fast-paced thriller/mystery, but it is so worth it, and honestly, it doesn't feel too long when you're reading it because it is so gripping, and I became so invested so quickly. I really, really loved all of the characters. I loved the romance at the heart, but I also really enjoyed all of the friendships and the friendship dynamics explored in this book, and I also think that the exploration of misogyny and institutional corruption were handled really well, and I just loved this book. As someone who doesn't tend to gravitate to thriller or mystery, this book was just perfect and I cannot recommend it enough. And finally, my last genres for this video are classics and classic retellings, because I don't read that many classics. I'm working on it, I'm trying to read more, but one thing I do read a lot of is classic retellings. So for actual classics, my only sapphic rec is Carmilla, which is a sapphic vampire story. I really, really liked this as someone who doesn't read a lot of classics. It felt quite easy to read, it's quite short, and the vibes were just perfect, and I really enjoyed seeing the influence that that book clearly had on the vampire subgenre as a whole now. As for the classic retellings, I have 5 on this list, so I'm going to kind of rapid fire through them a little bit because as they're in this video, I recommend them, therefore I think that the writing, the characters, the plot, all of that good stuff is good. But as they're retellings of classic literature, less needs to be explained about the plot and all that. So without further ado, here are the 5 sapphic classic retellings I would recommend. First of all, on the topic of Carmilla, An Education in Malice is a dark academia retelling of Carmilla. So much fun, really enjoyed this one. I did have some small issues with like the development in this, but overall the vibes really carried it and I would definitely recommend it. Escaping Mr. Rochester is a sapphic reimagining of Jane Eyre in which Jane and Bertha team up to escape from Mr. Rochester, and I really liked the agency and the voice that this provided to Bertha in particular. I thought it was really fun. And finally, as for sapphic reimaginings or retellings of Greek mythology, which is quickly becoming one of my favourite subgenres, we have The Enquiries, which is a sapphic reimagining of the Fall of Troy told through the perspectives of Helen and Cassandra. Lies We Sing to the Sea, which is a sapphic fantasy which is inspired by the tale of the 12 hanged maids in the Odyssey. And last but certainly not least, Gentlest of Wild Things, which is a sapphic take on the myth of Eros and Psyche with influences from the Lamia story, and I only just finished this one and absolutely fell in love with it. So there we have it, some sapphic book recs based on your favourite genre. So hopefully there's something for everyone in this list. Needless to say, this has only scratched the surface of all the incredible sapphic books that are out there, but next time you see someone claiming that there are no good sapphic books, you can prove them wrong, and I highly, highly recommend every single book in this list. As I said before, please do feel free to leave a comment if you have any favourite sapphic books that you'd like to recommend that you think I left off this list, or if you're looking for a sapphic rec for a specific genre that I didn't touch on here. It would be lovely to chat to some of you in the comments, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.